If you're a nice guy who's been ignored your whole life, this is going to hurt to hear. You've done everything right. You text her every morning. You ask about her day. You remember the small things she mentions, her favorite coffee order, the name of her dog, the stress she's under at work. You're thoughtful, you're consistent, you're safe, and she still chose the guy who doesn't text back for 3 days. Let me show you something most people will never admit out loud. Female desire does not respond to effort, it responds to mystery. And the very niceness you believe is your greatest strength, it's the exact thing making you invisible. Your chest tightens when you see her laughing at someone else's joke, someone who barely knows her name. She keeps choosing chaos over stability. The man who forgets her birthday over the man who planned it weeks in advance. Here's the uncomfortable truth. It's not because she doesn't see your effort, it's because she sees it too clearly. And in that clarity, she sees something else, something you don't want to admit is there. She sees your need. When a woman senses your kindness isn't coming from abundance, when it's coming from a desperate hope that if you're good enough, patient enough, nice enough, she'll finally choose you, desire dies. Not slowly, not over time, immediately. Because attraction isn't built on comfort, it's built on uncertainty, on emotional peaks and valleys, on the feeling that you might lose something before you've fully captured it. Every time you text first, every time you're available within minutes, every time you bend over backwards to accommodate her schedule, her moods, her needs. You're not building attraction, you're killing it. Desire is not logical, it's chemical. And the chemical you're triggering with all that niceness, it's not dopamine, it's serotonin, the chemical of safety, of friendship, of let's just be friends. The men she desires don't perform their interest, they don't audition for her approval. They don't bend themselves into shapes to fit her expectations. What if I told you that being a nice guy isn't the problem, but what's hiding beneath the niceness? Women don't reject nice guys because they want to be treated poorly, but because they can smell the desperation underneath the kindness from a mile away. This is going to hurt to hear, but it's true. Your niceness is a covert contract, and she knows it. There's one paradox that explains all of this. A truth so counterintuitive that when you finally see it, it will invert everything you believe about attraction. Stay with me, because what I'm about to show you will change the way you see yourself, your patterns, and every interaction you've ever had with a woman you desired but couldn't have. Let me show you what most people never see. On the surface, it looks simple. You're kind, you're thoughtful, you're everything a woman says she wants. And yet, you're invisible. So you think the problem is that you're not trying hard enough. You double down on the niceness. You become even more accommodating, even more available, even more eager to prove your worth. But that's not what's happening beneath the surface. Beneath the surface, there's a psychological dynamic at play that nobody talks about. A dynamic that explains why the men who seem to care less end up getting more, and why the men who try the hardest end up alone. It's called the scarcity paradox. Here's how it works. When something is always available, always accessible, always there, it loses value. Not because it's inherently worthless, but because the human brain is wired to pursue what feels scarce, rare, difficult to obtain. Think about it. Have you ever noticed how you obsess over the woman who's hard to read, who doesn't always respond, who keeps you guessing while losing interest in the woman who makes her feelings crystal clear from day one? It's not because you're shallow. It's because your brain is designed to chase uncertainty, to solve puzzles, to win over what feels just out of reach. Women's brains work the same way. And every time you make yourself completely available, emotionally, physically, mentally, you're removing the very thing that creates desire, tension. But here's where it gets deeper. Because it's not just about availability, it's about what your availability signals. When you're always understanding, always patient, always accommodating, what message is your behavior sending? You think you're saying, I care about you, I value you, I'm a good man. But what she's hearing is, I don't have options. I don't have a life outside of hoping you'll choose me. I need you more than you need me. And the moment that imbalance is established, the moment she senses that you need her validation more than she needs yours, the game is over. Because attraction requires equilibrium, not performance, not effort, equilibrium. The question every nice guy needs to ask isn't, how do I prove I'm worthy of her? The question is, am I living as a man who doesn't need to prove anything? One is rooted in scarcity. The other is rooted in abundance. One is driven by fear, the fear that if you're not nice enough, attentive enough, perfect enough, she'll leave. The other is driven by self-worth, the knowledge that your value doesn't depend on her approval. Call him the sovereign man, the man who governs himself, who doesn't need external validation to feel whole, who understands that his power comes not from being chosen, but from choosing himself first. And women can feel that difference instantly, not consciously, instinctively. They can sense when your kindness is genuine, when it's coming from a place of overflow, of confidence, of I'm being kind because that's who I am, not because I need something from you. And they can sense when your kindness is transactional, when it's coming from a place of desperation, of please choose me, please see me, please don't leave. That's the scent of neediness, and it repels desire faster than anything else. And this is why the invisibility cuts so deep, because you've been disappearing into the performance, hoping that if you just tried harder, someone would finally see you. But the harder you try, the more you vanish. Have you ever walked into a job interview and said, I'll do anything, just give me a chance, I need this job so badly? Do you know what happens in that room? The interviewer loses respect, not because you're unqualified, but because desperation kills authority. It inspires pity, not admiration. Now imagine walking into that same interview with the energy of, I'm excellent at what I do. I'm here to see if this is a mutual fit. Everything changes. You're no longer auditioning, you're evaluating. You're no longer performing, you're presenting. That's the shift. And it applies to attraction in exactly the same way. But here's the part they never tell you, the part that makes this so much harder to accept. You didn't become this way because you're weak. You became this way because somewhere along the line you learned that your worth was conditional, that love had to be earned, that if you weren't useful, accommodating, perfect, you'd be abandoned. And now, without realizing it, you're repeating that pattern over and over, with every woman you desire. Who taught you that you had to perform to be loved? Why does being alone feel like proof that you're not enough instead of an opportunity to choose yourself? The niceness isn't the problem. The problem is that you've been trying to earn something that can't be earned, and in doing so, you've forgotten that you were already whole. We're getting closer to that paradox I mentioned, the one that changes the entire game. Stay with me, because what comes next is where everything shifts. Here's the truth you don't want to hear, and it's going to hurt. Your niceness isn't generosity. It's a strategy, a covert contract, an unconscious negotiation that says, if I'm good enough to you, you'll have to choose me. But relationships don't work that way. Desire doesn't work that way. And deep down beneath all the rationalizations, all the I'm just being a good person defenses, you know it. You know because you felt the resentment. You felt it when she doesn't text back as quickly as you texted her, when she cancels plans last minute, when she talks about another guy and you feel that sharp, bitter twist in your chest. You felt it when you realized that all your effort, all your patience, all your understanding, it didn't matter. She still chose someone else. And in that moment, a dark thought creeps in. After everything I did for her, that thought, that's the shadow. That's the part of you that knows your kindness wasn't unconditional. It was transactional. You were keeping score. You were building a case for why she should choose you. And when she didn't, the contract was broken. The resentment surfaced. But here's what Carl Jung understood that most people never grasp. The shadow isn't your enemy, it's your teacher. Because that resentment, it's showing you where you've been lying to yourself. It's showing you that you've been pretending to be selfless while secretly hoping for a return. That you've been playing the role of the nice guy, not because it's who you are, but because it's the only way you know how to seek love without risking rejection. Let me show you what this looks like in practice. Picture this. You meet a woman, you're attracted to her. Instead of making your interest clear, you become her friend. You listen to her problems. You support her emotionally. You're there for her at 2 a.m. when she's crying about the guy who hurt her. And the whole time, you're telling yourself, I'm just being a good friend. But you're not. You're auditioning. You're hoping that if you're patient enough, supportive enough, safe enough, energy, that's what she's been searching for the entire time. Not the perfect man. Not the man who never makes mistakes. The man who is so at peace with himself that he doesn't need her validation to feel worthy. And here's the final paradox. The one that will either liberate you or terrify you. The moment you truly stop caring whether she chooses you. The moment you genuinely reclaim your emotional independence and live for yourself, one of two things will happen. Either she'll start chasing you, or she won't. And here's the truth you need to accept. Both outcomes are a win. If she chases you, it's because she finally sees you as a man of value. A man who isn't desperately clinging, but choosing her from a place of abundance. If she doesn't, it's because she was never your person to begin with, and you've just saved yourself months or years of performing for someone who was never going to see you the way you needed to be seen. Either way, you win. Because you've reclaimed yourself. You've stopped outsourcing your worth. You've stopped building your life around the hope of being chosen. You've stopped disappearing into the role of the nice guy who never gets the girl. And you finally stepped into the man you were always capable of being. The man who doesn't need to be chosen because he's already chosen himself. That's the paradox. That's the shift. That's the truth that changes everything. But knowing the paradox isn't enough. You need to integrate it, and that's where most men fail. Let me show you how to actually do this. So what now? Now you integrate. Not with tactics, not with strategies, with truth. You start by asking yourself the question you've been avoiding. Who am I when I'm not performing for approval? Because the answer to that question, the real answer, not the one you wish were true, that's where your power lives. If you've built your entire identity around being the nice guy, the supportive guy, the guy who's always there, what happens when you stop playing that role? Do you disappear? Or do you finally appear? This is the work, the shadow work, the integration. It's not about becoming cold or detached or emotionally unavailable. It's about becoming so rooted in your own worth that your kindness becomes a gift, not a negotiation. It's about building a life so full, so purposeful, so deeply aligned with who you are, that a woman's presence becomes a bonus, not a requirement. This is the path to becoming the sovereign man. Not through tactics, not through manipulation, through genuine self-governance and reclaiming your emotional independence. The question isn't how do I get her to want me? The question is what part of me am I abandoning by making her the center of my life? Integration means reclaiming the disowned parts, the anger, the desire, the self-worth you've outsourced to her approval. Let me give you something concrete, not tactics. Field experiments in reclaiming yourself. The silence test. When she doesn't respond to your text, your only action is silence. No follow-up, no meme, no just checking in. You simply continue living your life. This is your training in outcome independence. The cancellation test. When she cancels plans, your only response is, no problem, enjoy your night. You do not ask why. You do not suggest an alternative. You do not reorganize your world to accommodate her. You move on with your original plans. This is your training in self-priority. The availability test. Stop being available within minutes. When she texts, you respond when you're done with what you're doing, not immediately. Not to play games, but because you have a life that doesn't revolve around your phone. This is your training in abundance. These aren't manipulations. They're clarifying experiments. If she forgets about you because you don't text for a week, was she ever really interested in you or just comfortable with your attention? That's not a cruel question. It's a clarifying one. Because you deserve someone who's invested in you, not someone who tolerates your presence because you make yourself convenient. Redirect your energy. Take the hours you spend overthinking her texts, analyzing her behavior, wondering if she likes you, and pour that energy into something that builds you. Because the truth is you can't attract someone from a place of emptiness. You can only attract someone from a place of overflow. And overflow doesn't come from another person. It comes from you. From the way you show up for yourself. From the life you build when no one is watching. Have you ever noticed that the moments you feel most attractive are the moments you're not thinking about being attractive? When you're fully absorbed in something you love. When you're laughing with friends. When you're in flow, creating, building. living. That's not a coincidence. That's alignment. That's what it feels like to be whole. And wholeness? That's the most magnetic thing in the world. Not perfection, not performance, wholeness. Now, here's the challenge. Can you choose yourself even when no one else is choosing you? Can you build your life, your worth, your identity on something other than whether a woman finds you attractive? Can you walk away from someone who doesn't see your value without collapsing into the belief that you have no value? Because that's the test. That's the initiation. That's what separates the men who stay stuck in the nice guy pattern from the men who break free. You have to be willing to be alone, not because you want to be alone, but because you're no longer willing to abandon yourself just to avoid loneliness. You have to be willing to say, I'd rather be alone and whole than in a relationship and empty. And the moment you make that choice, the moment you genuinely choose yourself, everything changes. Not because you've become someone else, but because you finally become yourself. The version of you that doesn't need permission to exist, that doesn't need validation to feel worthy, that doesn't need to be chosen to know that you matter. That version of you, that's who she's been waiting for the whole time. Not the performer, not the people pleaser, not the man who disappears into niceness. The man who is so comfortable in his own skin that he doesn't need to convince anyone of anything. The man who shows up as he is, flawed, real, imperfect, and says, this is me, take it or leave it. Either way, I'll be fine. That's the man who gets remembered. That's the man who creates desire, not because he's perfect, but because he's real. And real? Real is rare. And here's what happens to that terror, that soul-crushing feeling of being invisible despite trying your hardest. It doesn't disappear. It transforms. Because you realize that you were never invisible. You were just looking for validation in people who couldn't see you. But when you stop performing, when you stop disappearing into niceness, when you finally show up as yourself, you discover something. The right people could see you all along. You just couldn't see yourself. So here's my final question for you. What would your life look like if you stopped waiting to be chosen and started choosing yourself every single day? What would change if you redirected all that energy, all that effort, all that overthinking, all that performing back into building a life you don't need to escape from? What if the reason nice guys stay invisible isn't because you're not enough, but because you've been hiding behind niceness instead of showing up as yourself? You don't need to be nicer. You don't need to try harder. You don't need to earn love. You need to remember that you were whole before she showed up. And you'll still be whole if she leaves. The terror of being invisible despite trying your hardest, that terror was real. But it wasn't about her not seeing you. It was about you not showing up. And now you know. Effort doesn't create desire, but presence does. Not the performance, the presence. You were never disappearing because you weren't enough. You were disappearing because you were trying too hard to be seen. Now stop trying. Start existing. That's how you become unforgettable. That's the truth. That's the shift. That's the integration. Now go live it. Now it's your turn. I want to hear from you in the comments. What is the first thing you're stopping today? Are you stopping the double texts, the constant availability, the reorganizing your life around her schedule? Tell me, what's the one covert contract you're breaking right now? Drop your answer below. I read every single comment, and if this message hit you where you needed it, if you finally see the pattern you've been running, make sure you're subscribed, because next week we're going deeper into the shadow work that most men avoid their entire lives. Stop chasing. Start existing. I'll see you next week. She'll eventually see you as more than a friend. Except she doesn't. Because you never gave her the chance to. You never created tension. You never took a risk. You never made her feel the uncertainty that sparks attraction. Instead, you became her emotional support system, her therapist, her safe place. And in doing so, you killed any possibility of desire. Because desire requires risk. It requires the possibility of loss. The feeling that something could slip away before you fully grasped it. But you made yourself so available, so predictable, so utterly safe, that there was no mystery left, no challenge, No reason for her brain to release the dopamine that creates obsession. You thought you were building intimacy, but you were actually building familiarity. And familiarity, without tension, is the death of attraction. Now let me take you deeper. Imagine a theater. You're sitting in the audience, watching a film projected on a screen. The images are vivid, compelling, emotional. You're captivated. But then someone walks you backstage, shows you the projector, the reel, the machinery behind the illusion. Suddenly the magic is gone. You can't unsee it. You can't lose yourself in the story anymore because you know exactly how it works. That's what happens when you're too available, too transparent, too eager. You show her the projector. You reveal all the machinery of your interest, and the mystery, the very thing that made you intriguing, disappears. The men who captivate her, they never show the projector. They let her wonder. They let her fill in the gaps. They create space for her imagination to run wild. And her imagination? That's where desire lives. Not in certainty. Not in predictability. In the unknown. Now let me show you what's really happening in the shadow. The part you've been hiding from your entire life. Here's the shadow truth beneath all of this. The part that Jung spent his entire life trying to help people see. You're not afraid of her rejecting you. You're afraid of yourself. You're afraid that if you stop performing, stop trying, stop being nice, there'd be nothing left. That without the mask of the good guy, you'll be exposed as unworthy, unlovable, not enough. And that fear, that's the wound driving all of this. But here's what you haven't seen yet, the wound beneath the wound. You're not afraid she'll reject you. You're afraid that even if she chooses you, you'll still feel empty. Because the hole you're trying to fill with her validation, it was never about her. It's the abandoned child inside you still waiting for the love that never came. And no woman can fill that wound. Only you can. Sit with that for a moment. Because most men never do. They spend their entire lives building elaborate strategies to avoid it. Niceness is just one strategy. Workaholism is another. Emotional unavailability. Perfectionism. Addiction. All different masks for the same wound. I'm not enough as I am. But here's what Jung discovered that changed everything. The wound isn't the problem. Your relationship with the wound is. You've been running from it your entire life, trying to prove it wrong through achievement, through being useful, through being needed. But the wound doesn't need to be disproven, it needs to be integrated. Because that wounded part of you, the part that feels unworthy, unlovable, not enough, it's not your enemy. It's the most honest part of you, the part that's been telling the truth while the rest of you has been performing. Integration means bringing that part into the light, not to fix it, not to get rid of it, but to say, I see you, you're part of me, and I'm not abandoning you anymore. When you do that, when you stop trying to exile the wounded parts and start embracing them, something extraordinary happens. You stop needing external validation because you're finally giving yourself the acceptance you've been desperately seeking from others. What would happen if you stopped trying to earn love and just existed as you are? This is where most men turn away. Because what comes next requires you to face the part of yourself you've been avoiding your entire life. The part that believes you're not enough unless you're useful. The part that equates love with performance. The part that would rather be invisible than risk being seen and rejecting. Jung called this integration. The process of bringing your shadow into the light. Of owning the parts of yourself you've disowned. But there's one more layer to this. The final piece that ties everything together. We're almost there. And here's the paradox. The moment you stop trying to be liked, the moment you stop performing, stop auditioning, stop seeking validation, you become infinitely more attractive. Not because you've become an asshole, but because you've become real, because you've stopped pretending, stopped hiding, stopped negotiating for love. And that authenticity, that groundedness, that I'm not here to convince you of anything energy, that's what she's been waiting for the whole time. But you can't fake it. You can't perform authenticity. You can't strategize your way into genuine self-worth. Stop avoiding this. Ask yourself these questions and actually answer them. Who am I when I'm not trying to be chosen? What do I want when I'm not seeking approval? What does my life look like when I stop building it around the hope that someone will finally see me? And here's the final piece, the one that ties everything together. She doesn't remember the man who treated her best. She remembers the man who made her feel the most. Not the most comfortable, not the most safe, the most alive. And you can't make someone feel alive when you're not fully alive yourself. You can't create intensity when you're afraid of your own intensity. You can't inspire desire when you're trapped in the cage of needing to be desired. That's the shadow truth. That's the part that changes everything if you're willing to face it. Now, here's the part they never tell you. Remember that paradox I promised you at the beginning? Remember what I said, that female desire doesn't respond to effort, it responds to mystery? Here's the paradox that will change everything. The moment you stop needing her to choose you, you become the man she can't stop thinking about. Not because you've become cold, not because you've become manipulative, but because you finally stepped into emotional equilibrium. Let me show you what this looks like. There are two men, both interested in the same woman. The first man texts her every morning. "Good morning, beautiful. Hope you have an amazing day." He's consistent, reliable, always available. When she takes hours to respond, he's still there, waiting, ready to pick up exactly where it left off. The second man, he texts when he feels like it. Sometimes it's morning, sometimes it's 3 days later. When she responds, he engages fully, present, playful, real. But when he's busy, when he's focused on his life, she doesn't hear from him. And she notices. The first man is predictable. She knows exactly where he stands. There's no tension, no mystery, no reason to wonder, to chase, to invest emotional energy. The second man? He's a puzzle. She doesn't know where she stands. And that uncertainty, that gap between texts, that space where her imagination fills in the blanks, that's where desire grows. It's not about playing games. It's about having a life that doesn't revolve around her validation. Here's the question you need to ask yourself. If she disappeared tomorrow, would your life collapse, or would it continue, full and whole and purposeful without her? Because she can feel the answer to that question in every interaction. When your happiness depends on her response, her attention, her approval, she feels the weight of that responsibility, and it's suffocating. But when your happiness is rooted in yourself, in your purpose, your passions, your unshakable sense of self, she feels the freedom to desire you without the burden of completing you. That's the paradox. The less you need her, the more she wants you. Not because women are broken or manipulative, but because desire requires space. It requires two whole people choosing each other, not one desperate person clinging to another. And here's the deeper truth beneath this paradox. The men who are emotionally unavailable aren't attractive because they're assholes. They're attractive because they've accidentally stumbled into the energy of self-sufficiency. They're not texting constantly because they have other things going on. They're not always available because they have priorities beyond seeking validation. They're not bending over backwards because they don't need to prove anything. And women interpret that behavior as confidence, as outcome independence, as, "This man doesn't need me." Which means if he chooses me, it's because he genuinely wants me, not because he's terrified of being alone. It's not about becoming unavailable for the sake of strategy. It's about becoming so deeply rooted in your own worth that availability becomes a choice, not a desperate attempt to be seen. This is what separates the sovereign man from everyone else. He doesn't play games. He doesn't manipulate. He simply lives from a place of such deep self-governance that his presence alone shifts the dynamic. Now let me bring this full circle. You've been taught that love is earned through effort, through sacrifice, through proving yourself worthy. But the truth is, love that has to be earned isn't love. It's a transaction. Real desire, real attraction. It's not transactional. It's magnetic. And magnetism doesn't come from effort. It comes from presence, from the feeling that you're completely comfortable in your own skin, that you're not performing, not auditioning, not seeking approval. You're just there, solid, grounded, unavailable to the chaos of needing someone else to make you whole. That